In the last set of material, we learned how to use the business model canvas to draw out key focal points about the business so that our problem scenarios are more focused. Now what we're going to do is learn how to create thoughtful process designs as a kind of prototype to link with our user stories and drive to what's valuable about what we're going to do or not valuable so that we can stay focused and not create a bunch of output that users don't like. We're specifically going to start from the key activities. Now, you don't need to read this. It's just an example of a Gantt chart. This is not the kind of process design we're going to talk about, nor is the big, giant flowchart swim lane thing that sits on a COO's wall but kind of doesn't reflect reality. We are going to use this model to create nice, soluble, well-organized, discrete process ideas that are going to help us very specifically and very iteratively drive our agile practice forward to create valuable software. So, the atomic process that we're going to be using always has an input and an output. If it doesn't have those things, it isn't a real process. Now, that doesn't mean that it always has the same conclusion, but it has this thing that we will measure as an output, and we'll always look at whatever outcome the process has as this kind of final event. And I'll show you some examples as we go through. The other thing that all processes have is a series of transformative steps. Now, this is not a flow chart. Those are a little bit different. This is a thing that we're focused on about, steps where individuals, for instance, transition things between them. Like, so when does the salesperson hand this off to the order management people, or things like that. And then we're looking at key decisions, key places where data gets interacted with or our systems get interacted with. And then you can see these annotations. These will often refer to our user stories that we've learned are our key thing that we use to think about what we're going to do. And every process should have these 3 process metrics. Even if we're not going to ascribe any real importance to measuring them, and we won't for a lot of processes, if you can't think through these 3 things for each process, and it sounds like a lot, but it'll get really easy for you, then it's probably not a real specific process. So each of these processes should have what's called a process metric. So if we make doorknobs, it's how many doorknobs can we make an hour? It has an output metric. So what percentage of the doorknobs that we put out are flawed and have to be reworked or discarded? And then finally, and this is the probably least specific, but how do we know that customers like or care about the doorknobs, that it's actually helping drive those key activities forward in a meaningful way? Now, we're here not to just describe processes, but to make them better. Otherwise, why are we investing in this enterprise software? And as we look to improve processes and validate that what we're doing is helping, we want to think about the way people are spending their time in these 3 buckets that you see here. NVA time, non-value added time, is time that an individual spends that's basically wasted. So this is time spent waiting for other people to do things, time spent fixing processes or outputs that are broken, and we want to look to eliminate this if we can. BVA time is time spent answering questions, reporting, creating information that the business needs to run itself. And another way of looking at this is basically it's paperwork. And what we're looking to do here is we're looking to minimize this. It's kind of a necessary evil that's understood and accepted, but how do we create a system that keeps that to an absolute minimum? And RVA time is things that pay off to customers, pay off to the key activities that we identified earlier, and we're looking to free people up from these other buckets so that they can spend their time here. We're looking to maximize this. So this is a way that we'll look at whether or not what we're doing is actually helping the business. And the way that we keep all these activities organized is in a hierarchical process inventory. I know, sounds a little bit boring. Now we're getting back into this whole processy thing, but this is a good way to keep things clear, stay focused on what part of the business you're dealing with your enterprise software, who needs to be involved, who you should go to when you're doing your research on user stories and when you're doing your research on validating your results. And These flow from the key activities we identified in the business model canvas. That's kind of our top layer of our organizational scheme, our taxonomy here. Each of those key activities has functional processes, and then if we need more detail, those then have sub-processes. Here's an example from United Children's Theater. A key activity we said was donor development, and qualifying donors is a process that they go through. So we look here at who's the owner. DM stands for Development Manager. This is a person that they're hiring to be in charge of getting donations. They use Salesforce in this case. And the input is a fundraising campaign. So a charter and a set of objectives. And the output is a qualified donor. Now, you may be thinking, well, what if the donor is not qualified? Well, what we mean by this is actually a donor that has gone through a process and been definitively qualified as either yes, they're okay, or no, they're not qualified and we shouldn't be bugging them anymore. So the process metric is the number of donors that they've qualified. The output metric is the number of unqualified donors that were mistakenly qualified. So have we taken people through the process and we continue to call on them and solicit donations when our process should have identified that United Children's Theater wasn't a good fit for them? That would be our output metric. How many of those do we end up with? And the outcome, the payoff to the business is how much money do we raise? How is our donor pool growing? Okay, so there's an example, and you can see how key activity is at the top level and then a functional process is down below. This template for this spreadsheet is available also in the lesson materials. We've looked at how to take that output, the key activities from the business model canvas, and decompose that into a set of nice soluble process definitions that we can use to then link user stories to and make sure that we're driving to something valuable before we create enterprise software that no one wants to use. In the next two videos, I'll show you some examples where we work through a cycle of talking to subjects, sketching out processes, and then linking user stories to those.